Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place where your thoughts are allowed to slow down, where questions are not chased for answers, but gently observed as they drift by. Tonight, our journey takes us into a subtle and unsettling mystery, one that almost everyone has touched at least once, often without speaking about it out loud. We'll be exploring the enigma of precognitive dreams, those moments when a dream seems to arrive before reality, as if your sleeping mind briefly stepped ahead of time itself. Before we settle in completely, if you find these calm explorations comforting, you're always welcome to like this video or subscribe. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always quietly beautiful to imagine all of us listening from different corners of the night, each wrapped in our own small pocket of time. Now, as you get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, maybe let a soft background sound fill the room, allow your attention to loosen. There's nothing here you need to remember, nothing you need to solve. If your thoughts wander, that's perfectly fine. We'll still be here, gently unfolding the story. Tonight's question is simple, but it echoes deeply. What if some dreams are not only reflections of the past, but subtle hints of what has not yet arrived? And with that quiet curiosity, let's begin. There's a certain kind of silence that follows a strange dream. Not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of recognition. You wake up, perhaps just before morning, with the lingering feeling that something mattered. The dream itself may already be fading, faces blurring, places dissolving, but an impression remains, a gentle pressure in the chest, a thought that refuses to fully form. And then, sometimes days or weeks later, something happens, a conversation, an accident, a small ordinary moment, and suddenly, without warning, a thought rises. I've seen this before, not in detail, not like a replay, but in a way that feels intimate and convincing, as if your mind is quietly nodding to itself. Most of us brush this off. We smile uncomfortably, maybe shake our heads, and move on. Life is busy. Coincidences happen. Dreams are strange. End of story. And yet almost everyone has experienced this at least once. A dream that seems to arrive too early. A feeling of familiarity with something that should be new. A moment where time feels slightly out of alignment. What's remarkable is not how dramatic these experiences are, but how common they are. They don't arrive with thunder or prophecy. They arrive softly, in kitchens, on sidewalks, in the middle of ordinary days. Science, of course, has many useful explanations for why the mind feels this way. Memory is flexible. Perception is imperfect. The brain is a master of pattern making, always stitching fragments into stories, and much of the time these explanations work beautifully. But here, in this quiet space, we're not asking whether every strange dream is a message from the future. We're asking something gentler. Why does this question keep returning? Despite our training to dismiss it, despite our discomfort with uncertainty, the idea refuses to disappear. It shows up in history, in personal stories, in private moments people rarely share unless they trust the listener. Even people who consider themselves deeply rational will sometimes lower their voices before admitting, I once had a dream that came true, not perfectly, not dramatically, but enough to unsettle them. What makes this question so persistent is not the dream itself. It's the feeling that follows, the feeling that time, which usually behaves so obediently, may have briefly loosened its grip. Modern life encourages us to think of time as a straight road, yesterday behind us, tomorrow ahead. Dreams in this picture are echoes, leftovers from memory, emotion, and imagination. Useful perhaps, entertaining maybe, but firmly rooted in what has already been. And yet, The dreaming mind doesn't seem to experience time that way. In dreams, years collapse into seconds. People long gone speak as if they never left. Events rearrange themselves without apology. The usual rules soften, and because of that, dreams have always existed in a strange position. Close to us, but never fully under control. Long before laboratories and brain scanners, humans treated dreams as meaningful, not because they were always accurate, but because they felt connected to emotions, to decisions, to unseen patterns in life. Dreams were not instructions, they were signals, hints, reflections cast at unusual angles. In modern science, we've become very good at asking questions that can be measured. How fast does a neuron fire? Which region of the brain lights up during sleep? How does memory consolidate overnight? These are powerful questions. They've taught us a great deal. But the question of whether a dream can ever relate to something that has not yet happened sits uncomfortably at the edges. It doesn't fit neatly into controlled experiments. It resists repetition. And perhaps most importantly, it blurs the line between objective measurement and subjective experience. This is why the topic of precognitive dreams is often avoided rather than explored. Not because it is silly, but because it is slippery. If science is a map, this is a region with fog, and fog makes us uneasy. What we'll be doing together is not lifting the fog all at once. That would be dishonest. Instead, we'll walk slowly along its edge. We'll listen to stories, both personal and historical. We'll look at how the brain builds dreams from fragments of memory and emotion. We'll examine why coincidence feels so powerful, and why skepticism exists for good reasons. And occasionally we'll allow ourselves to wonder whether the limits lie not in the world itself, but in the tools we currently use to describe it. There is no demand here for belief. There is no pressure to conclude, only an invitation to stay with the question a little longer than usual. As we move forward, notice how your own mind responds. Does it lean in? Does it resist? Does it drift? All of that is welcome here. Because before we can ask whether dreams ever glimpse the future, we first have to understand why the question feels so natural to ask at all. And that understanding begins not in the laboratory, but in the quiet, familiar feeling of waking up and thinking. If only for a moment, this feels strangely known. There is a particular kind of moment that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't interrupt the day with drama or demand immediate attention. Instead, it slips in quietly, almost politely, and leaves you standing there for a few seconds longer than usual. You're in the middle of something ordinary. A conversation unfolds. A sound repeats itself. Someone says a sentence in a very specific way. And suddenly, a strange sense of familiarity rises. Not the familiarity of routine, but something deeper, more unsettling. It feels as if the present moment has already been rehearsed somewhere else. Not remembered, exactly. Recognized. People often struggle to describe this feeling because language isn't well equipped for it. Saying "I dreamed this before" sounds too precise, too confident. In reality, the experience is often vague. The dream itself may be foggy or incomplete. You might not recall faces or settings clearly. What you remember is the feeling, a quiet certainty that this moment belongs to something you've encountered before, perhaps while asleep. This is why these experiences are so easy to dismiss and so difficult to forget. On the surface, they resemble déjà vu, a phenomenon familiar to psychology and neuroscience. Déjà vu is usually described as the sensation that a current experience feels oddly familiar, even though you know it shouldn't. It's brief, often harmless, and surprisingly common. Most people experience it at least once, and many experience it repeatedly throughout their lives. But when dreams are involved, the feeling changes slightly. Instead of simply thinking, This feels familiar. People think, I've seen this. Not clearly, not in full detail, but enough to create a quiet disturbance in the usual flow of time. What's important here is not whether the dream truly came first. What matters is how convincing the experience feels to the person having it. Our minds are extraordinarily good at creating coherence. They're constantly trying to make sense of the world, stitching together fragments of perception, memory, emotion, and expectation. When something unexpected happens, the brain doesn't like loose ends. It looks for patterns. It searches its internal archives. And if it finds anything even loosely related, a dream image, a passing thought, a half-remembered scene, it may link them together. This linking doesn't feel like a choice. It feels automatic, almost inevitable. Imagine walking through a room and catching the faint smell of something familiar. You may not immediately know what it is, but the feeling arrives before the explanation. Only later do you realize it reminds you of a place you once visited, or a meal from long ago. Dreams can work in a similar way. They leave emotional traces behind even when their details fade. And when reality brushes against those traces, recognition sparks. This is one reason why many precognitive dreams are remembered as impressions rather than scenes. People rarely say, I dreamed exactly this conversation word for word. More often they say, I dreamed something like this, or the feeling was the same. The mind is not a recording device. It doesn't store experiences like files in a cabinet. Instead, it stores pieces, colours, emotions, tensions, outcomes, and recombines them when needed. When a waking event happens to resemble one of those internal patterns, the match feels meaningful, especially when emotion is involved. Emotion acts like a highlighter in memory. Events that carry fear, anticipation, urgency, or relief tend to leave stronger marks. Dreams that are emotionally charged are more likely to be remembered, and remembered vividly. So when something emotional happens later in real life, the mind naturally searches for earlier emotional echoes, and sometimes it finds them in dreams. From the inside, this process doesn't feel mechanical. It feels personal, intimate, as if your own mind is quietly telling you a secret. This is why even people who are deeply skeptical of paranormal explanations can find themselves unsettled by these moments. The experience doesn't arrive as an abstract idea. It arrives as a sensation, felt in the body, not argued in the head. For a brief moment, time seems less orderly than usual. Psychology offers explanations for why this happens, and many of them are quite persuasive. The brain may be mislabeling familiarity. Memory may be reconstructing itself after the fact. Attention may be shifting in subtle ways. All of these mechanisms are real and well supported. But explanations do not always dissolve the feeling. Knowing how a feeling might arise does not necessarily erase the feeling itself. The recognition still arrives, the pause still happens, and the question still lingers quietly in the background. Why did this moment feel like it had already passed through me once before? This lingering quality is part of what makes these experiences so enduring. They don't demand belief. They don't insist on interpretation. They simply sit there, unresolved, like a note that doesn't quite fade away. Over time, people learn different ways to live with this. Some laugh it off, some store it away as a curiosity, some become more attentive to their dreams, others become more cautious, even anxious, wondering whether such moments carry meaning or warning. And many people never speak about them at all, because there is a vulnerability in admitting that something felt out of order. That time may not have behaved exactly as expected, that the mind, while asleep, might have touched something it doesn't fully understand. As we move deeper into this exploration, it's worth holding on to this distinction between what can be explained and what can be felt. Science excels at the first. Human experience lives firmly in the second, and precognitive feeling dreams sit precisely at the boundary between the two, not as declarations, not as proof, but as moments of recognition that leave us quietly wondering whether the story of time is as simple as we've been taught. Long before dreams were measured, scanned, or categorized, they were listened to. In many ancient societies, dreams were not treated as private hallucinations of the sleeping mind. They were considered messages, sometimes symbolic, sometimes urgent, often mysterious. People gathered to share them, elders interpreted them, rulers acted on them. Not because dreams were always accurate, but because they were believed to arrive from a place that ordinary waking thought could not reach. To our modern ears, this may sound naive. We're trained to be cautious around stories that stretch beyond measurement. And yet, when we look back, something quietly unsettling emerges. These stories never fully disappeared. They adapted, they softened, but they persisted. Throughout history, there are recurring accounts of dreams that seem to arrive ahead of tragedy. Warnings dreamt by people who could not explain why they felt compelled to speak. Dreams that were dismissed at the time, only to be remembered later when events gave them new weight. One of the most often mentioned examples is linked to the sinking of the Titanic. In the weeks before the ship's maiden voyage, some passengers reportedly dreamed of disaster, of water rushing through corridors, of confusion, of something grand failing unexpectedly. At the time, these dreams were brushed aside. After all, the ship was celebrated as nearly unsinkable. Dreams, it was assumed, were merely reflections of anxiety stirred by news and imagination. Only later did these dreams gain attention, reshaped by loss and hindsight. Another haunting example comes from the Aberfan disaster in Wales, where a coal waste tip collapsed in 1966, burying a school and killing many children. In the aftermath, stories surfaced of children and adults who had dreamt of the school disappearing, of something dark and heavy descending, of a sense that something was terribly wrong. These accounts were not gathered before the tragedy, they emerged afterward, carried by grief and disbelief. It's important to pause here. These stories are not proof of foreknowledge, they are not scientific evidence, they are narratives remembered through trauma, filtered by time, shaped by emotion. Science is right to treat them cautiously, but they raise a different kind of question. Why do humans, across cultures and centuries, repeatedly return to the idea that dreams might carry warnings, even when belief systems change? Even when scientific understanding advances, even when skepticism becomes the default? Part of the answer lies in how memory works under emotional pressure. After a major event, especially one involving loss, the mind searches desperately for meaning. It looks backward, scanning for signs that something could have been known, something that might have prevented the pain. Dreams, already mysterious and flexible, become natural containers for this search. But there is another layer, quieter and more psychological. Dreams often express what waking life does not allow us to fully feel. Anxiety without a clear object, intuition without a clear cause, a sense of imbalance that hasn't yet found words. When a tragedy later occurs, these earlier emotional signals can appear prophetic, even if they were originally responses to subtle cues in the environment. News reports, social tension, unspoken fears. From this perspective, dreams are less like predictions and more like early weather patterns. Not forecasts of a specific storm, but shifts in pressure that suggest something is building. This does not make the experiences meaningless. On the contrary, it may explain why they feel so powerful. In cultures where dreams were taken seriously, this power was acknowledged rather than denied. People didn't ask whether a dream was literally true. They asked what it revealed about the dreamer, the community, or the moment in time. Dreams were mirrors held at unusual angles. As scientific thinking developed, this interpretive role of dreams gradually faded. Dreams became internal events, sealed inside the skull, detached from the external world. This shift brought enormous clarity and progress, but it also left behind a certain silence. We gained precision, but lost a shared language for ambiguity. So when modern people experience dreams that seem to echo future events, they often find themselves without a framework to hold the experience. The old interpretations feel outdated, the new explanations feel incomplete. The result is a quiet discomfort, felt but rarely discussed. It's also worth noticing how selective historical memory can be. We remember the dreams that appear to align with events. We forget the countless dreams that led nowhere. This selective remembering is not deception. It is a natural human tendency, intensified by emotion and storytelling. And yet, even acknowledging this, the persistence of these stories across time remains intriguing. They suggest that the human mind has always sensed something unusual about dreams. That even without scientific language, people recognize that dreaming consciousness operates differently from waking thought. That it rearranges time, emotion, and meaning in ways that don't fit neatly into cause and effect. As we move forward, we won't treat these historical accounts as evidence of supernatural insight. But we won't discard them either. Instead, we'll treat them as signals, indicators of a long-standing human intuition that dreams occupy a threshold space, a space where memory, imagination, emotion, and time overlap. Understanding that space requires care, it requires humility, and it requires resisting the urge to jump too quickly to conclusions in either direction. Because whether or not dreams ever glimpse the future, history reminds us of something important. Humans have always felt that sleep opens a door that waking life keeps firmly closed, and even now, with all our knowledge, we're still standing quietly in front of that door, listening. As history fades gently into the background, the focus drifts closer to the present moment. Not to dramatic disasters or legendary ships, but to ordinary lives unfolding quietly around us. Because if dreams that feel ahead of time exist at all, they most often appear not in history books, but in kitchens, bedrooms, buses, and late-night phone calls. In recent years, people have begun sharing these experiences more openly. Online forums, comment sections, and late-night conversations are filled with small, careful confessions. Someone dreams of receiving an unexpected message, and days later their phone lights up with words they swear they've already read. Someone dreams of running into an old friend they haven't thought about in years, only to meet them by chance the following week. Someone dreams of a minor accident, nothing dramatic, and then watches it happen almost exactly as imagined. These stories rarely feel grand. They're not about winning lotteries or predicting world events. They're about missed trains, awkward conversations, sudden news, and fleeting encounters. And perhaps that ordinariness is what makes them so unsettling. If the dream were dramatic, it would be easy to dismiss. But when the dream mirrors everyday life, the line between coincidence and something more becomes harder to see. What's striking is how often people hesitate before telling these stories. They preface them with disclaimers. They laugh nervously. They say things like, "I know this sounds silly," or "It's probably nothing." This hesitation matters. It tells us that the experience itself carries weight, even when belief does not. From the inside, these moments don't feel random. They feel connected. And connection is something the human mind is constantly seeking. Psychologically, we are wired to look for meaning in sequences. When two events occur close together in time, especially if one feels emotionally charged. The mind naturally links them. This linking is not a flaw. It is how we learn, how we anticipate danger, how we navigate social life. Without it, the world would feel chaotic and unmanageable. Dreams add an extra layer to this process because they arrive uninvited. We do not choose their content. We do not edit them as they unfold. They emerge from a place that feels both personal and unfamiliar. When waking life later appears to echo them, the connection feels almost intimate, as if the mind has been quietly working ahead of conscious awareness. But not all dreams feel this way. Many dreams are fragmented, symbolic, or confusing. They dissolve quickly after waking. Others linger vividly, carrying strong emotion or a sense of urgency. People who report dreams that feel precognitive often describe this difference clearly. They say things like, "It felt different," or "I woke up knowing I should remember it." Emotion plays a crucial role here. Emotional dreams are remembered more easily, not because they are more accurate, but because emotion acts like glue for memory. Fear, anticipation, and surprise strengthen recall. So when a later event carries a similar emotional tone, the memory of the dream resurfaces with unusual clarity. This does not mean the dream caused the event. It means the dream and the event share a similar emotional shape. There's also the question of personality. Some people naturally pay more attention to their inner experiences. They notice subtle shifts in mood. They remember dreams more frequently. They reflect on coincidences instead of brushing them aside. This doesn't make them more prone to magical thinking. It simply means they collect more data from their own minds. For these people, dream reality overlaps may feel more frequent, not because they happen more often, but because they are more likely to be noticed, remembered, and revisited. Others move through life with their attention firmly anchored to the external world. They forget dreams quickly. They prioritize what can be measured and confirmed. For them, similar overlaps may occur but pass unnoticed, dissolving before they have a chance to register. Neither approach is better or worse. They are simply different ways of relating to experience. Another concept that often arises in these discussions is synchronicity, a term used to describe meaningful coincidences that do not appear to be causally related. Unlike prediction, synchronicity does not claim that one event causes another. Instead, it suggests that certain moments feel connected by meaning rather than mechanism. From a scientific standpoint, synchronicity is difficult to study because meaning is subjective. What feels deeply significant to one person may feel trivial to another. But from a human standpoint, these experiences are undeniably real. They shape how people interpret their lives, their choices, and their sense of being part of something larger. Dreams that appear to align with waking events often fall into this category. They don't necessarily predict, they resonate. This resonance can be comforting, but it can also be unsettling. Some people begin to question their sense of control. Others wonder whether they should act differently after such dreams. A few become anxious, fearing that dreams might carry warnings they could miss. This is why it's important to approach these experiences gently, not as instructions, not as proof, but as reflections of how deeply the human mind weaves together inner and outer worlds. Science tends to focus on what can be repeated, measured, and tested. Personal experiences resist this structure. They vary widely. They depend on memory, emotion, and interpretation. But that does not make them meaningless. It simply places them in a different category of understanding. As we continue, we will look more closely at how science tries to explain these overlaps and why it often struggles. But for now, it's enough to acknowledge that many people experience moments when dreams and reality seem to rhyme. Not perfectly, not predictably, but enough to leave an impression. And perhaps that impression is not asking to be solved. Perhaps it is simply asking to be noticed. Not all dreams leave the same trace behind. Some dissolve almost immediately after waking, slipping away like mist as soon as the eyes open. Others linger. They stay with us through the morning, follow us into the afternoon, and sometimes return days later with surprising clarity. When people describe dreams that seem to arrive ahead of reality, they often begin by saying one simple thing: this one felt different. Understanding why requires us to slow down and look at how dreams are remembered, not how they are dreamed. When you sleep, your mind does not shut down. It changes posture. Attention turns inward. The outside world grows quieter and internal signals become louder. During certain phases of sleep, especially those closer to morning, the mind becomes particularly active in weaving stories. These stories are not written in words. They are assembled from emotion, imagery, and fragments of experience, stitched together without much concern for logic or order. Most of these stories vanish quickly because the brain has no reason to keep them. Memory is selective. It saves what seems useful or emotionally relevant and lets the rest go. Dreams that carry little emotional weight are often treated as disposable. But when a dream contains strong emotion, the brain pays attention. Fear, anticipation, joy, urgency, these emotions act like bookmarks. They tell the mind, this matters. As a result, emotionally charged dreams are far more likely to be remembered, and remembered vividly. This is not because they are more meaningful in some cosmic sense, but because emotion strengthens memory. Imagine highlighting a sentence in a book. The words are the same as the rest of the page, but your eye is drawn to them later. Emotion works in much the same way for dreams. This is why many dreams that later feel precognitive are not detailed predictions. They are emotional sketches, a sense of danger, a feeling of anticipation, a moment of tension. When something similar happens later in waking life, the emotional match stands out, and the dream resurfaces. From the inside, this resurfacing feels powerful. It feels intentional. But memory does not replay dreams exactly as they occurred. Each time a memory is recalled, it is subtly rewritten. Details shift, gaps are filled. The mind smooths rough edges, often without awareness. Over time, the remembered dream may grow closer to the waking event, not because it was originally precise, but because memory naturally moves toward coherence. This process is gentle and automatic. It is not deception. It is how memory works. Another factor that shapes which dreams stay with us is how much attention we give them after waking. Some people pause when they wake up. They reflect. They replay the dream in their minds. They may even write it down. Others jump straight into the day, allowing the dream to fade before it has a chance to settle. Studies of dream recall consistently show that people who believe dreams are meaningful tend to remember them more often and in greater detail. This belief does not create the dreams. It simply changes how much space the mind gives them afterward. In other words, attention strengthens memory. This is important because it helps explain why certain individuals report frequent dream reality overlaps, while others do not. It is not necessarily that one group is experiencing something fundamentally different. It may be that one group is simply noticing and preserving these experiences more carefully. Symbolism also plays a role. Many dreams do not present events literally. They use images and metaphors drawn from personal experience. A dream about rising water may not be about water at all. It may be about pressure, change, or emotional overwhelm. When a real-life event later carries a similar emotional meaning, the symbolic dream suddenly feels relevant. This symbolic nature makes dreams flexible. they can fit many situations after the fact. This flexibility is part of their power, but also part of the reason science treats them cautiously. Still, none of this diminishes how convincing these experiences feel. When a dream lingers with unusual clarity, it invites interpretation. The mind naturally asks, why this one? Why now? Sometimes the answer is simply that the dream arrived at the right emotional moment. Other times, the answer remains unclear. It is also worth noting that not all vivid dreams are pleasant. Dreams that feel urgent or foreboding can leave people unsettled long after waking. When such a dream appears to align with a later event, the emotional impact can be magnified. The dream begins to feel like a warning that was somehow ignored. This can create anxiety. People may start monitoring their dreams closely, worrying that they might miss something important. Over time, this hyperattention can distort perception, making coincidences feel more significant than they are. For this reason, many researchers emphasize the importance of balance. Dreams can be meaningful without being directive. They can offer insight without demanding action. They can reflect inner states without forecasting outer events. From a scientific perspective, dreams are best understood as simulations. The mind takes pieces of the past, blends them with present emotion, and projects possible futures, not as predictions but as rehearsals. These rehearsals help us adapt. They allow us to explore scenarios safely without consequence. When a rehearsal happens to resemble reality later on, it feels remarkable. But that resemblance may be a byproduct of the brain doing what it does best: preparing, anticipating, and imagining. As we move forward, we will look more closely at how science tries to study these phenomena and why it often reaches its limits. But for now, it's enough to understand that the sharpness of certain dreams is not random. It is shaped by emotion, attention, and memory. And sometimes, that is enough to make a dream feel as if it arrived early. After the moment of recognition fades, after the familiar feeling loosens its grip, something quieter remains. A question, perhaps, or a subtle shift in how a person relates to their own mind. For many people, dreams that seem to arrive ahead of time are not dramatic turning points. They don't change careers or inspire grand decisions. Instead, they leave a small imprint, a pause before dismissing coincidence, a gentle curiosity about the inner world, a sense that the boundary between sleeping and waking life may be thinner than it appears. Others experience something more complicated. When a dream feels closely aligned with a later event, especially one charged with emotion, it can linger in the background of daily life. People may replay the dream repeatedly, wondering if there were details they missed, signs they failed to recognize. The experience can quietly reshape how they think about intuition, foresight, and control. This is where the emotional impact of these dreams becomes important. Some people feel comforted by the idea that their minds might be quietly preparing them for what lies ahead. The dream becomes a kind of companion, offering reassurance that nothing arrives completely unannounced. Even if the future remains uncertain, the feeling of connection can be soothing. Others feel the opposite. They begin to wonder whether they should pay closer attention to their dreams, whether every intense image carries hidden meaning. Over time, this vigilance can turn into anxiety. Dreams that were once curious become sources of worry. The night no longer feels like rest, but like a responsibility. Both responses are understandable. Human beings are not particularly comfortable with uncertainty. We like to know what matters, what can be ignored, and what requires action. Dreams resist these categories. They speak in metaphor. They blur cause and effect. They refuse to clarify their intentions. When waking life appears to echo them, the ambiguity deepens. Some people respond by turning away from the experience entirely. They choose skepticism as a form of protection, deciding that it is safer to label everything coincidence than to live with unanswered questions. This response is not shallow, it is practical. It allows life to move forward without unnecessary weight. Others move in the opposite direction. They lean into the mystery. They keep dream journals. They reflect. They search for patterns. For them, dreams become a language worth listening to, even if it never speaks clearly. Between these two extremes lies a quieter path. It is possible to acknowledge the experience without letting it dominate interpretation, to recognize that a dream felt meaningful without assuming it was predictive, to hold curiosity without surrendering agency. From a psychological perspective, this middle ground is often the healthiest place to stand. Dreams reflect internal states. They reveal emotional landscapes that waking life sometimes hides. When a dream aligns with a later event, it may be highlighting something the dreamer was already sensitive to, a relationship under strain, a situation carrying risk, a change quietly approaching. In this way, dreams can be understood as amplifiers rather than oracles. They turn up the volume on signals that are already present, even if they are subtle. This interpretation preserves the emotional reality of the experience without attributing it to forces beyond understanding. It allows people to respect their inner world while remaining grounded in the present. There is also an important social dimension to consider. Many people who experience these dreams feel isolated by them. They hesitate to talk about them for fear of being dismissed or misunderstood. When they do share, they often look for reassurance more than explanation. This suggests that part of what people are seeking is not confirmation of prediction, but validation of experience. They want to know that they are not alone in feeling this way, that others have also sensed the strange elasticity of time within their own minds. Creating space for these conversations does not require endorsing supernatural explanations. It requires listening without judgment. Science, at its best, does this well. It listens carefully. It asks how often something happens, under what conditions, and why it feels the way it does. But science also has limits. It works with patterns, averages, and probabilities. Personal meaning does not always translate cleanly into these terms. This gap can leave individuals feeling caught between two worlds. On one side, their lived experience. On the other, explanations that feel incomplete or emotionally distant. Understanding this tension is essential as we move forward. It helps explain why debates about dreams and precognition are often emotionally charged. They're not only about facts, they're about identity, trust, and how we make sense of uncertainty. When someone says, "I dreamed this before," they're not usually asking to be proven right. They are asking to be heard. As we continue, we will begin to examine how science responds to these experiences and why skepticism plays such an important role. But it's worth remembering that skepticism is not the opposite of curiosity. At its best, it is curiosity with discipline, and discipline, like rest, requires balance. For now, it is enough to notice how these experiences are lived, how they shape emotion more than belief, how they invite reflection rather than conclusion. Dreams that feel ahead of time do not demand action. They ask for awareness. An awareness held gently can coexist with uncertainty. Sometimes, the most reasonable response is not to decide what a dream means, but to allow it to pass through the mind like a quiet visitor, noticed, respected, and then released. When science approaches a question, it brings a particular kind of patience with it. A patience shaped by caution, by repetition, by a long history of ideas that once seemed convincing, only to quietly collapse under closer inspection. This patience is one of science's great strengths, but in certain areas it can feel like distance. Dreams that appear to arrive ahead of time live in one of those areas. From the outside, it may seem as though science simply refuses to engage, as if it has drawn a firm line and decided that anything touching precognition belongs somewhere else, outside the laboratory, outside serious discussion. But the reality is more subtle than that. Science hesitates not because the topic is uninteresting, but because it challenges some of its most basic working assumptions. At the heart of modern science lies a simple expectation: causes come before effects. Information flows forward. Time moves in one direction. These assumptions are not philosophical preferences. They are practical foundations. Without them, experiments become difficult to design, results become difficult to interpret, and explanations lose their structure. Dreams that seem to reference future events quietly push against this structure. If a dream were truly influenced by something that had not yet happened, then information would be moving in an unfamiliar way, not faster, not hidden, but out of sequence. This is not something science can easily test, because testing requires knowing what to measure, when to measure it, and how to separate signal from coincidence. This is why neuroscience, in particular, tends to frame dreams as backward-looking rather than forward-looking. Dreams are understood as processes that draw from memory, emotion, and recent experience. They reorganize what has already occurred. They help the brain integrate information, regulate emotion, and explore possible scenarios. From this perspective, dreams are simulations. They run through variations of what has been seen, felt, or anticipated. They do not require access to future information. They only require imagination and memory working together in the quiet hours of sleep. This framework explains a great deal. It explains why dreams borrow faces from people we know, places from our past, and emotions from unresolved situations. It explains why stress can influence dream content, and why anticipation often shows up symbolically at night. But when people describe dreams that seem uncannily aligned with later events, this framework begins to feel slightly strained, not broken, just incomplete. Science responds to this discomfort by asking difficult questions. How often do these dreams actually occur? How specific are they really? How many similar dreams did not align with anything at all? What role does memory play in shaping the story after the event? These questions are not dismissive, they are protective. They guard against being misled by coincidence, narrative bias, and selective recall. Human beings are excellent storytellers, especially when emotion is involved. We naturally edit, emphasize, and simplify in ways that make experiences feel more meaningful than they may have been originally. Science has learned, sometimes painfully, that anecdotes alone are not enough. At the same time, science faces a genuine challenge here. Precognitive feeling dreams are spontaneous. They do not arrive on schedule. They cannot be summoned on demand. They often lack clear boundaries. Studying them in controlled environments risks stripping away the very conditions under which they occur. This creates a tension. On one hand, science requires structure. On the other, dreams resist it. As a result, much of mainstream neuroscience focuses on what can be reliably observed: brain activity during sleep, patterns of memory consolidation, emotional processing, and the general architecture of dreaming. These areas have produced valuable insights. They explain how dreams are generated and why they feel real while they happen. What they struggle to explain is why some dreams feel temporally displaced. Rather than confronting this directly, science often reframes the question. Instead of asking whether dreams can access future information, it asks how the brain constructs the feeling of familiarity. Instead of asking whether a dream predicted an event, it asks how memory might have been reshaped afterward. This reframing is not avoidance, it is a methodological choice. By focusing on mechanisms that are already understood, science stays within its strengths. But this also means that certain questions are left open, not because they are forbidden, but because they do not yet fit the available tools. There is also a cultural factor at play. Fields that stray too close to the appearance of paranormal claims risk losing credibility. Funding becomes harder to secure. Peer review becomes harsher. Careers can be affected. Over time, this creates a quiet pressure to stay within safe boundaries. Again, this is not conspiracy. It is inertia. Science moves most comfortably along paths that have already been cleared. And yet, it is worth remembering that many ideas now considered foundational once sat at the edges of acceptability. The notion that invisible organisms cause disease, the idea that continents drift, the realization that time itself can stretch and contract under certain conditions. Each of these concepts faced resistance, not because they were absurd, but because they required new ways of measuring and thinking. Dreams that seem to arrive ahead of time may represent a similar situation. Not necessarily in outcome, but in posture. They ask questions that current models are not well equipped to answer. This does not mean those questions are correct. It means they are inconvenient. Science's hesitation, then, is not a verdict. It is a pause, a holding pattern, while better tools, clearer definitions, and more careful methods are developed. Understanding this helps soften the apparent divide between personal experience and scientific explanation. It shows that skepticism does not equal denial, and that caution does not imply contempt. Science is not saying, "This cannot happen." It is saying, "We do not yet know how to study this responsibly." And sometimes, that distinction matters more than it seems. As we continue, we'll begin to look at how science examines these experiences when it does venture closer to the edge, and what happens when it tries. There is a quiet habit the mind has, one it rarely announces. It remembers what fits and gently lets go of what does not. This habit is not a flaw. It is a necessity. Without it, memory would become an overwhelming archive of unfiltered detail. Every thought, every image, every fleeting impression would demand equal attention. Life would be exhausting, so the mind edits, it highlights, it simplifies, and most of the time this works in our favour. But when it comes to dreams that appear to align with future events, this habit becomes especially important. Imagine for a moment the sheer number of dreams a person has over a lifetime. Thousands upon thousands. Most are forgotten within minutes. Others are remembered briefly and then fade. Only a small fraction are recalled days or weeks later, and an even smaller fraction are revisited after something happens in waking life. Now imagine that one of those remembered dreams seems to echo a real event. Perhaps not exactly, but close enough to feel significant. That dream immediately stands out. It is replayed, re-examined, retold. It becomes part of a story. What often goes unnoticed are the many dreams that did not echo anything at all. This is not because people are dishonest. It is because the mind naturally keeps what feels meaningful and releases what feels irrelevant. In psychology, this tendency is often described as remembering the hits and forgetting the misses. In everyday language, it simply means we notice when something matches, and we rarely keep track of how often it doesn't. To understand how powerful this effect can be, consider a simple everyday example. If you think about a friend you haven't spoken to in years and they call you the next day, the coincidence feels remarkable. You may mention it to others, you may remember it for a long time. But how often have you thought about someone who did not call? Those moments rarely register. Dreams work the same way. A dream that aligns with nothing quietly disappears. A dream that seems to align with something becomes memorable. Over time, This creates the impression that alignment happens more often than it actually does. There's another layer to this process that is even more subtle. When a waking event occurs, memory does not simply retrieve the dream as it was originally experienced. It reconstructs it. Details that were once vague may become sharper. Elements that were missing may be filled in. The remembered version of the dream slowly drifts closer to the waking event, not because the dream was precise, but because memory prefers coherence. This reconstruction happens without awareness. The person is not lying to themselves. The memory feels authentic. Each retelling strengthens the revised version, until it becomes difficult to separate what was dreamed from what was later inferred. This is why researchers place so much emphasis on dream journals that are written immediately after waking, with timestamps and unedited descriptions. Such records provide a rare snapshot of the dream before memory reshapes it. But in everyday life, very few people keep such records consistently. As a result, most accounts of precognitive feeling dreams rely on memory that has already been filtered through time and emotion. This does not make the experiences invalid. It simply means they are vulnerable to distortion. Another factor that shapes perception is expectation. When people believe that dreams might carry meaning, they are more likely to notice correspondences. This does not mean they are imagining them. It means their attention is tuned differently. They are scanning for patterns, just as someone interested in birds notices species others walk past without seeing. Expectation guides attention, and attention guides memory. This is one reason why discussions of dreams can become polarized. Skeptics emphasize missed correspondences and memory bias. Believers emphasize personal conviction and emotional resonance. Both perspectives are responding to different aspects of the same process. What is often missing from the conversation is a simple acknowledgement. Human memory is not designed to keep statistical records. We do not naturally count how many dreams did not come true. We do not calculate probabilities when something feels meaningful. We experience first and analyze later, if at all. This is not a weakness. It is how humans make sense of a complex world. Science, however, requires a different approach. It asks not only whether something happened, but how often it happens compared to chance. It asks for baselines, controls, and complete datasets, including the failures. This is where personal experience and scientific evaluation sometimes talk past each other. From the inside, a single striking dream can feel profound, even transformative. From the outside, that same dream is one data point among countless others. Both views are valid within their own frames. The difficulty arises when one frame is mistaken for the other. Understanding this gap does not strip dreams of meaning. It simply relocates that meaning. Instead of seeing a dream as evidence of future knowledge, it can be seen as evidence of how the mind constructs narrative and significance. And that in itself is remarkable. The mind does not passively record reality. It actively weaves it. It searches for order. It links inner experience with outer events. Dreams are part of this weaving, not separate from it. So when a dream appears to arrive before reality, it may not be pointing forward in time. It may be revealing something about how memory reaches backward, reshaping itself to make sense of what has occurred. This interpretation does not require dismissing the experience. It asks only that we hold it gently, without turning it into proof or prophecy. As we move closer to the edges of scientific study, we will see how researchers attempt to account for these biases, and what happens when they try to measure what feels inherently personal. For now, it is enough to recognize that the feeling of having dreamed something before it happened may say as much about memory as it does about time, and perhaps that is not a reduction, but a reframing. There is a quiet irony at the heart of dream research. Dreams are deeply human, universally experienced and endlessly discussed. And yet, they occur in the one place science cannot directly enter, the private interior of a sleeping mind. This alone makes them difficult to study. But dreams that seem to arrive ahead of time introduce an additional layer of complexity. They are not only private, they are unpredictable. They do not announce themselves, they cannot be summoned on request, and they often reveal their significance only after something else has happened. Science, by contrast, is built around anticipation. An experiment is planned, variables are defined, measurements are taken at specific times, outcomes are compared. The entire structure depends on knowing what to look for before it appears. Precognitive feeling dreams resist this structure almost completely. To study such dreams directly, a researcher would need to know which dreams matter before the dreamer does. They would need to distinguish, in advance, between thousands of ordinary dreams and the few that might later feel significant. This is not simply difficult, it borders on impossible with current methods. As a result, most scientific work on dreaming focuses on what can be reliably observed: brain activity during sleep, patterns of neural communication, changes in heart rate, breathing, and muscle tone. These measurements have taught us a great deal about how the dreaming brain behaves. They tell us when dreams are more likely to occur. They reveal how emotion is processed during sleep. They show how memories are replayed, reorganized, and sometimes softened. All of this information is valuable, but none of it tells us what a dream means to the dreamer, or how it will be interpreted later in the light of new events. Meaning is slippery. It shifts over time. It depends on context, culture, and personal history. A dream that feels insignificant one day may feel profound the next, simply because something else has changed. This is one reason why controlled laboratory studies often feel unsatisfying to people who have experienced striking dream-reality overlaps. The lab can tell us what the brain was doing. It cannot easily tell us why a particular dream stayed with someone, or why it felt different from the hundreds of others that were forgotten. There is also the issue of timing. Dreams happen during sleep. Events happen during waking life. The connection between the two is often made retrospectively. That is, the dream is remembered first, the event occurs later, and only then does the relationship become visible. Science generally prefers prospective designs, where predictions are made in advance and outcomes are measured afterward. With dreams, this sequence is reversed. Trying to study precognitive feeling dreams prospectively would require people to record every dream in detail, over long periods of time, and then track subsequent life events with equal care. Even then, interpreting correspondences would be challenging. What counts as a match? How close is close enough? Who decides? These questions are not trivial, they shape the results. Another complication arises from the sheer flexibility of dream imagery. Dreams are rarely literal. They borrow symbols, exaggerate emotions, and rearrange scenes freely. A dream about falling may later feel relevant to a failure at work. A dream about water may feel connected to emotional overwhelm. These connections are meaningful, but they are also subjective. From a scientific standpoint, subjectivity introduces uncertainty. It makes standardization difficult. It raises the risk of confirmation bias, and it blurs the line between interpretation and observation. This does not mean subjectivity should be ignored. It means it must be handled carefully. Some researchers have attempted to bridge this gap by focusing not on dreams themselves, but on physiological signals that occur around them. Changes in heart rate, subtle shifts in skin response, patterns of brain activity that precede emotional dreams. These approaches aim to anchor the study of dreams in measurable processes without claiming to explain their content fully. Others have explored the role of expectation and belief, examining how people's attitudes toward dreams influence recall and interpretation. These studies reveal that belief does not create experiences, but it does shape how experiences are remembered and shared. What remains elusive is a method that captures both the inner richness of dreaming and the outer rigour of science. This elusiveness has consequences. It encourages skepticism, it discourages funding, it nudges the topic toward the margins of research, where it is often handled cautiously, if at all. Over time, this creates the impression that science has dismissed the phenomenon entirely. In reality, science has simply not found a comfortable way to approach it. This discomfort is not unique to dreams. Other deeply personal experiences such as pain, emotion, and consciousness itself have long challenged scientific study. Progress in these areas has been slow and incremental, driven by advances in measurement and theory. Dreams that appear to reference future events may be waiting for a similar shift. Not a breakthrough that confirms or denies them outright, but a gradual expansion of tools and concepts that allow them to be studied more thoughtfully. Until then, science remains cautious. It listens, but from a distance. It acknowledges reports, but refrains from strong claims. It focuses on what it can verify, while leaving some questions open. This restraint can feel frustrating, especially to those whose experiences feel vivid and personal. But it is also part of what gives scientific conclusions their strength when they do arrive. For now, the study of precognitive feeling dreams sits at a crossroads, between private experience and public evidence, between meaning and measurement, between what feels known and what can be shown. Understanding this position helps explain why the topic remains unresolved. It is not because the question is uninteresting. It is because it lives in the narrow space where certainty is hardest to reach. And sometimes, the most honest response science can offer is not an answer, but a careful silence. Sometimes, before the mind has time to think, the body responds. You may have felt this yourself. A subtle tightening in the chest before bad news arrives, a sense of unease that appears without explanation. A moment when your body seems to know something your thoughts have not yet caught up with. These experiences are easy to dismiss. We call them nerves, intuition, coincidence, and most of the time, that is enough. But for a small group of researchers, this quiet gap between body and mind has raised an unusual question. What if, in rare cases, the body reacts before the event itself unfolds? This question sits at the edge of the laboratory, where curiosity meets caution. The phenomenon's often described using a careful technical term, presentiment. Rather than suggesting foresight or prediction, presentiment refers to something much more modest. It describes subtle physiological changes, tiny shifts in the body, that appear to occur shortly before an emotionally charged event, even when the event is random and unknown to the person experiencing it. To understand how this is studied, imagine a simple setup. A person sits quietly in a room, connected to sensors that measure gentle bodily signals, changes in skin moisture, heart rhythm or breathing. On a screen, images are shown at random. Some are emotionally neutral, others are designed to provoke a stronger response such as surprise or discomfort. The key detail is that neither the participant nor the researcher knows which image will appear next. The mind, in theory, should react only after the image appears. And yet in some experiments, researchers notice something curious. On average, the body signals appeared to shift slightly before the emotionally charged images, as if preparing itself a few seconds early. The changes were small, almost imperceptible without careful measurement, but they were consistent enough across many trials to draw attention. It's important to pause here. These findings do not suggest that the body knows the future in any meaningful sense. They do not imply visions, messages, or hidden awareness. What they suggest, if the effect is real at all, is that the body may sometimes respond to information in ways we do not yet fully understand, and that if matters. Presentiment research is controversial for good reasons. The effects are subtle, the measurements are sensitive. Small differences in experimental design can influence results. Critics argue that hidden biases, data selection, or statistical quirks could explain the findings. Supporters argue that the effects persist even when strict controls are applied. What makes this area unusual is not that it has been accepted, but that it has not been easily dismissed either. Large reviews of multiple studies have found small but recurring effects that are difficult to explain away completely, yet also difficult to interpret confidently. The results sit in an uncomfortable middle ground, suggestive but not decisive. This is why presentiment is best understood not as an answer, but as a hint. A hint that the body and mind may not always operate in the neat sequence we imagine. A hint that emotional processing might begin before conscious awareness fully registers what is happening. A hint that time, at least in the nervous system, may feel slightly less linear than our everyday experience suggests. There are, of course, alternative explanations. The body is constantly predicting. It scans the environment for patterns. It adjusts in anticipation of change. Even in a random sequence, the nervous system may fall into rhythms, responding to expectation rather than information. What looks like anticipation of the future could simply be the body preparing for intensity, not knowing when it will arrive, but sensing that it might. From this perspective, presentiment does not require information travelling backward in time. It requires only a sensitive system doing what it evolved to do: prepare for uncertainty. This explanation is appealing because it stays within familiar biology. It preserves cause and effect. It keeps time moving forward. And yet, even this interpretation leaves questions open. Why would preparation align more closely with emotional events than neutral ones? Why do the effects appear before the stimulus rather than after? Why are they so difficult to eliminate completely, even under careful controls? These questions do not demand extraordinary answers. They demand better understanding. What is striking is how carefully researchers in this area tend to speak. Claims are restrained, language is cautious. The emphasis is on uncertainty rather than discovery. This is not the tone of sensationalism. It is the tone of discomfort. No one is claiming that the body can see the future. No one is suggesting that dreams are messages sent from tomorrow. The suggestion, at most, is that the boundary between anticipation and reaction may be thinner than we assume. For our exploration of dreams, presentiment plays a subtle role. It does not explain precognitive dreams. It does not validate them. But it introduces an important idea, that bodily responses and conscious awareness may not always align perfectly in time. If the body can begin responding before the mind knows why, then dreams, products of a mind already untethered from strict timekeeping, might feel as if they arrive early, even when they're simply responding to patterns too faint for waking awareness. This interpretation keeps us grounded. It does not require new laws of physics. It does not dismiss personal experience. It simply suggests that the human system is more nuanced than our everyday categories allow. And that nuance matters, because when people say, "I felt it before it happened," they may not be claiming prophecy. They may be describing a mismatch between conscious understanding and unconscious processing. Presentiment research does not close the question of precognitive dreams. It gently opens a door, not to certainty, but to possibility. a possibility that the body and mind are quietly negotiating with uncertainty all the time, long before we notice. And perhaps in the quiet hours of sleep, that negotiation becomes easier to sense. When we speak about dreams that seem to arrive ahead of reality, it is tempting to imagine them as windows, openings through which the future briefly shines backward into the present. This image is powerful. It feels poetic, and for centuries it has shaped how people talk about prophetic dreams. But there is another way to think about dreams, one that remains grounded in science while still honouring the strange intimacy of the experience. Instead of windows, dreams may be simulators. Every night as the body rests, the mind stays quietly busy. It sorts, it tests, it imagines, it takes fragments of memory, emotion and expectation and arranges them into countless small stories. These stories are not meant to be accurate predictions. They are rehearsals, explorations, safe places to try out possibilities without consequence. Much like a flight simulator does not show a pilot the future, but prepares them for many possible conditions, dreams allow the mind to practice navigating uncertainty. During waking life, we constantly absorb information without realizing it. Subtle changes in tone, patterns in behavior, tensions in relationships, shifts in the environment. Most of this information never reaches conscious awareness. It accumulates quietly, like background noise. When we sleep, that noise becomes material. The dreaming mind takes these fragments and begins to ask silent questions. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if something changes suddenly? These questions are not spoken. They are felt. And the answers appear not as logic but as images and emotions. From this perspective, dreams are not messages from the future. They are reflections of how the mind prepares for it. This helps explain why so many dreams that later feel precognitive are emotionally accurate but factually loose. A dream may capture the feeling of loss without naming its cause. It may express tension without identifying its source. When a real-life event later carries a similar emotional shape, the dream resurfaces, feeling uncannily aligned. The alignment is not exact, it is resonant. Imagine looking at a weather forecast. It does not tell you precisely when a single raindrop will fall. It tells you conditions are favourable for rain. You prepare accordingly. You bring an umbrella. When rain arrives, it feels expected, even if the timing and details differ. Dreams may function in a similar way. They do not forecast events. They forecast moods, pressures, and possibilities. They explore what it would feel like if certain emotional conditions came to the surface. When waking life later mirrors those conditions, the dream feels prophetic, even though it was simply a rehearsal. This interpretation has an important advantage. It preserves the richness of the experience without requiring time to behave strangely. It does not suggest information travelling backward. It does not invoke hidden channels of knowledge. It stays within the known capacities of the human mind: pattern recognition, emotional processing, and imagination. And yet, it does not reduce dreams to noise. Simulations matter. They influence how we react. They shape intuition. They prepare us emotionally even when we do not consciously remember them. A dream that rehearses loss may soften the shock when loss arrives. A dream that explores danger may sharpen awareness when risk appears. In this way, dreams contribute to survival, not by predicting specific events, but by preparing flexible responses. This does not mean every dream is useful, or that every overlap is meaningful. Many simulations never match reality. They dissolve without consequence, but occasionally the conditions line up. A simulation overlaps with waking life, and the match feels extraordinary. What is important here is that the feeling of having seen it before does not require the dream to be accurate in detail. It requires only that the emotional and thematic structure align. This also explains why dreams often feel symbolic. Symbols are efficient. They compress complex emotional states into simple images. A collapsing building can represent instability. A journey can represent change. These symbols allow the mind to explore many outcomes with minimal detail. When a real event later triggers the same emotional pattern, the symbol reactivates. The mind connects the two, and recognition occurs. From the inside, this recognition can feel like insight. From the outside, it can be explained as simulation and memory interacting. Both perspectives can coexist. This approach also helps explain why dreams do not always feel helpful. Some simulations are anxious, some are exaggerated. The dreaming mind does not filter for comfort. It explores extremes. This can leave people waking with unease, even when nothing specific has gone wrong. Understanding dreams as simulations allows us to respond differently. Instead of asking, "What is this dream telling me will happen?" we can ask, "What is my mind practicing?" This subtle shift reduces fear without dismissing meaning. It turns dreams into mirrors of inner readiness rather than maps of outer fate. For listeners drifting towards sleep, this idea carries a certain comfort. It suggests that the mind is quietly doing its work, even when we are not watching. That dreams, however strange, are part of a system designed to help us navigate uncertainty, not predict it perfectly. And it leaves space for mystery, because even simulations can surprise us. They can reveal concerns we did not know we had. They can surface possibilities we were not consciously considering. They can prepare us for changes before we have words for them. In that sense, dreams do not need to be windows into the future to feel meaningful. They are windows into readiness. They show us how the mind adapts, anticipates, and imagines. And when reality happens to rhyme with one of these imagined paths, the resonance feels profound. Not because the dream saw the future, but because the mind was already quietly listening to the present. There is a quiet assumption that often follows scientific explanation. If something cannot be measured clearly, it must not exist in any meaningful way, or if it does exist, it must not matter very much. History suggests otherwise. Many phenomena were once invisible not because they were unreal, but because the tools to detect them had not yet been built. Before microscopes, entire worlds of life went unnoticed. Before sensitive instruments, the slow movement of continents was dismissed as impossible. Before precise clocks, time itself seemed absolute and uniform. In each case, the world did not change, the tools did. This perspective invites a gentle reconsideration of dreams that feel ahead of time. What if the difficulty lies not in the phenomenon, but in our ability to describe and measure it? What if the experience is real, but the language we use to study it is incomplete? Science is not a finished structure. It is a living process shaped by instruments, models, and metaphors. Each generation inherits a framework and slowly stretches it. When something does not fit, the first response is often skepticism. Not because the idea is foolish, but because the framework is not yet flexible enough to hold it. Dreams, especially those that appear to brush against the future, may be pressing gently against such limits. The challenge is not only technical, but conceptual. Modern science is deeply comfortable with objects and events, things that can be isolated, repeated, and measured. Dreams resist this treatment. They are experiences, not objects. They unfold differently for each person. They change when remembered. They blur the line between perception and interpretation. Trying to study dreams with the same tools used to study particles or machines can feel like trying to measure a melody with a ruler. Something essential is lost. This does not mean dreams exist beyond science. It means they may require different approaches. Some researchers suggest that the key may lie in patterns rather than events, not in whether a single dream matched a future moment, but in whether certain types of dreams correlate with certain emotional or situational changes over time. This shifts the focus from prediction to relationship. Others propose that timing itself may be part of the difficulty. The brain does not experience time as a simple sequence of ticks. Memory reaches backward, imagination reaches forward, awareness floats somewhere in between. When a dream later feels aligned with an event, the alignment may reflect how these temporal processes overlap internally, rather than how events unfold externally. From this view, the blind spot is not whether dreams access the future, but how consciousness navigates time. It is also possible that some aspects of experience simply do not translate cleanly into measurement. Pain, for example, can be described, rated and studied, but it is never fully captured by numbers. Consciousness itself remains one of science's most persistent mysteries, despite decades of research. Dreams live within this same territory. Acknowledging a blind spot does not weaken science, it strengthens it. It reminds us that scientific knowledge grows by identifying what it does not yet understand. Declaring a question closed too early risks freezing inquiry where curiosity should remain active. This does not mean every unexplained experience should be accepted as evidence of something extraordinary. It means unexplained experiences should be treated with care rather than contempt. There is a difference between saying, "This cannot be studied," and saying, "We do not yet know how to study this well." The first shuts doors, the second leaves them ajar. When people describe dreams that feel ahead of time, they are often not asking science to validate them. They're asking whether their experience has a place in our understanding of the mind, whether it can be acknowledged without being dismissed or exaggerated. Viewing the issue as a limitation of tools rather than a flaw in reality allows for a more generous response. It permits curiosity without surrendering rigor. It allows science to say, "This may matter, even if we cannot yet measure it properly," and it aligns with the history of discovery. Every major expansion of scientific understanding began with something that did not quite fit. Something observed before it was explained. Something felt before it was named. Dreams may be offering something similar, not necessarily a message from the future, but a reminder that the mind experiences time, meaning, and possibility in ways that exceed our current categories. This perspective does not require belief, it requires patience. As listeners, we can hold these ideas lightly. We do not need to decide what dreams truly are. We can simply acknowledge that they occupy a space where science, experience, and imagination overlap. And perhaps that overlap is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be explored. As we drift onward, the questions will begin to widen, from laboratories to philosophy, from measurements to meaning, from what we can test to what we can contemplate. For now, it is enough to recognize that not knowing is not the same as being wrong. Sometimes, it is simply an invitation to look again, with better tools and softer expectations. There is an idea about time that can feel deeply unsettling the first time you encounter it, not because it is violent or dramatic, but because it quietly removes something we're used to holding on to, the sense that the future is empty, unwritten, waiting. This idea suggests something different. What if the future already exists, not as a plan, not as destiny, but as part of a larger structure where past, present, and future are not separate places, but neighbouring regions of the same landscape? In this view, time does not flow like a river carrying us forward. Instead, it is more like a vast terrain, already laid out, through which our awareness slowly moves. This way of thinking is often called the block universe, but the name matters less than the image it invites. Imagine standing on a hill at night, looking down at a city. You can see streets stretching in many directions. Some lead behind you, some lead ahead. Cars move along them, but the roads themselves are already there. The movement happens within the structure, not because the structure is being created as the cars go. In this image, your awareness is like one of those cars moving steadily along a particular route. The route feels like a journey, but the map itself is already complete. This idea does not claim that you can see the whole city at once. It only suggests that the city exists whether you're looking at one street or another. For many people, this is uncomfortable. It seems to threaten free will. It feels as though choice might be an illusion, or that outcomes are fixed. But the idea does not require that conclusion. Even in a complete landscape, movement still matters. Decisions still shape the path you take. You cannot jump instantly from one street to another. You experience each moment one at a time with uncertainty intact. From inside the journey, the future still feels open. What changes is how we imagine its existence. Now consider dreams in this context. Dreams do not follow the same sense of time that waking life does. They compress years into moments. They revive the past effortlessly. They imagine futures without concern for sequence. In dreams, awareness seems less attached to the present moment, drifting freely across memory and possibility. If time is a landscape rather than a line, dreams may be moments when awareness loosens its grip on its usual position. Not travelling forward in time, but wandering across nearby regions of possibility. This does not mean dreams are visiting actual future events. It means they may be sampling from patterns that exist across the landscape. Emotional patterns, narrative structures, tendencies towards certain outcomes. When a dream later feels aligned with reality, the alignment may not be because the dream predicted the future, but because both dream and event are expressions of the same underlying structure. In this view, dreams are not windows into tomorrow, they are echoes within a larger whole. This idea helps explain why dreams are often vague, symbolic, and incomplete. If awareness is not meant to access precise details outside its current position, it makes sense that dreams would offer impressions rather than instructions. The discomfort many people feel with this idea comes from a deeply human desire to believe that the future is entirely open, waiting to be written. And in daily life, this belief serves us well. It motivates effort, it preserves responsibility, it gives meaning to choice. The block universe idea does not take that away, it simply reframes it. From the outside, the structure may exist. From the inside, choice still unfolds moment by moment. You still do not know what lies ahead. You still decide without certainty. You still live within time, even if time itself is larger than you experience. Dreams, in this sense, do not undermine freedom. They reflect the mind's ability to sense patterns without fully understanding them. They explore what could happen, not what must. This interpretation also explains why block universe ideas fascinate scientists and philosophers alike, while remaining deeply unsettling. They challenge intuition without offering comfort. They remove mystery in one place only to introduce it in another. And importantly, they do not ask us to believe anything about dreams in particular. They simply offer a framework in which the feeling of having dreamed something before it happened does not require a violation of physical laws. It requires only that consciousness experience time differently from clocks. Clocks tick forward. Awareness drifts. In waking life, this drift is constrained. We are anchored to the present by sensation, obligation, and habit. In sleep, those anchors loosen. Awareness becomes fluid. It moves across memory, imagination and possibility without concern for order. If the future exists as part of a larger structure, dreams may brush against its contours, not clearly, not deliberately, but enough to create resonance. Again, this is not a claim. It is a contemplation. The power of this idea lies not in its certainty, but in its ability to hold contradiction, to suggest that time can be both fixed and uncertain, that the future can exist and still feel open, that dreams can feel ahead of time without actually stepping outside it. For a listener resting quietly, this idea does not demand acceptance. It invites perspective. It allows you to think of dreams not as messages sent from tomorrow, but as moments when awareness loosens its grip on the present, drifting gently across a larger landscape of experience. Whether that landscape truly exists or is simply a useful metaphor remains an open question, one that science continues to explore and philosophy continues to debate. But even without answers, the image itself can be calming. Time as a landscape, awareness as movement, dreams as gentle wanderings across terrain we only partially understand, and perhaps that is enough for now. Long before dreams were measured or analysed, they were listened to. In many ancient and indigenous cultures, dreams were not treated as strange side effects of sleep. They were considered part of life's rhythm, woven into decisions, stories, and understanding. People did not ask whether dreams were scientifically valid. They asked what kind of attention a dream required. This difference in attitude matters. In societies without clocks marking every hour, time was experienced less as a straight line and more as a cycle. Seasons returned, stories repeated. Ancestors were remembered not as distant figures in the past, but as presences that continue to influence the living. Within this worldview, it felt natural that dreams could carry guidance, warnings, or insight without needing to predict specific events. Dreams were not calendars, they were conversations. Among many indigenous cultures, dreams were seen as ways of noticing patterns that waking life might overlook. A hunter might dream of an animal not as a forecast of tomorrow's hunt, but as a sign of imbalance, readiness, or respect. A community elder might interpret a troubling dream not as destiny, but as a call to reflection or caution. The focus was rarely on exact outcomes, it was on alignment. Shamans, for example, were not believed to see the future in the way modern imagination suggests. They were believed to move between layers of experience, between waking perception, memory, imagination, and shared meaning. Dreams were one of the spaces where these layers met. In these traditions, a dream that seemed to arrive ahead of time was not celebrated as supernatural. It was treated as meaningful precisely because it was symbolic. Its power came from what it revealed about relationships, responsibilities, and the unseen forces shaping daily life. This approach avoided a problem that modern discussions often fall into. Instead of asking, "Did the dream come true?" people asked, "What does this dream ask of us now?" The difference is subtle but profound. By focusing on interpretation rather than prediction, ancient cultures reduced anxiety around dreams. A dream was not a burden of knowledge about the future. It was an invitation to act with care in the present. Oracles, too, were often misunderstood by later generations. They did not function as fortune-telling machines. Their messages were famously ambiguous, filled with metaphor and open-ended language. This ambiguity was not a flaw, it was intentional, it preserved choice. A prophecy that can only be understood after the fact does not remove freedom, it reflects it. This perspective aligns surprisingly well with what we know about dreams today. Dreams speak in images, they exaggerate, they condense meaning into symbols, they resist literal interpretation. When we try to treat them as precise predictions, they slip away. But when we treat them as reflections of inner and communal patterns, they offer insight without certainty. It is important, however, to approach these traditions with respect rather than romanticism. Ancient and indigenous cultures were not mystical caricatures. They had rules, skepticism, and boundaries around dream interpretation. Not every dream mattered. Not every dream was shared. Wisdom lay in discernment, not belief. Dreams were discussed in context. Who dreamed it? When? During what phase of life? After what events? Meaning arose from relationship, not isolation. This stands in contrast to how modern individuals often encounter dreams, alone, privately, and without shared frameworks for interpretation. A dream that feels ahead of time can feel overwhelming precisely because it lacks context. In traditional settings, the dreamer was rarely left alone with the dream. There is also a humility in these older approaches that modern discussions sometimes lack. Dreams were seen as partial glimpses, never complete pictures. They hinted, they nudged, they did not command. This humility prevented dreams from becoming instruments of control. No one was expected to surrender responsibility because of a dream. Instead, dreams were woven into ongoing dialogue about values, balance, and responsibility. Seen this way, ancient perspectives do not stand in opposition to science. They operate in a different register. Science asks how things work. These traditions asked how to live well within what is not fully known. For listeners drifting towards sleep, this offers a gentle reframing. Perhaps the question is not whether dreams can show us the future, but whether they can help us sense when something in our lives deserves attention. Whether they can remind us to slow down, to notice tension, to care more deeply for our surroundings and relationships. Dreams in this sense are not messages from tomorrow, they are mirrors held up to the present, angled in ways that reveal what straight-on vision misses. And when a dream later feels aligned with a real event, the alignment may not be about prediction at all, it may be about resonance, between inner awareness and outer unfolding. This view does not require belief in anything extraordinary. It requires only respect for the ways humans across time have tried to understand themselves. By listening to these older perspectives, we're reminded that curiosity about dreams is not new. It is ancient, it predates laboratories and equations, and it persists not because dreams always come true, but because they continue to matter. They matter as stories we tell ourselves about uncertainty. They matter as tools for reflection. They matter as quiet companions in a world that rarely slows down. As we move forward, we will return once more to speculation, not to claim answers, but to explore ideas that continue to surface wherever time, information, and consciousness intersect. For now, it is enough to rest with the thought that humans have always sensed something meaningful in dreams. Not because dreams reveal fate, but because they reveal attention. And attention, when held gently, can be its own kind of wisdom. When conversations about dreams and the future drift far enough, they often reach a curious crossroads. It is a place where science, philosophy, and imagination pause together, unsure which direction to take next. At this crossroads, one question returns again and again, quietly reshaped each time it is asked. What if it is not people, or objects, or bodies that move through time in unusual ways, but information? This idea does not come from dreams alone. It emerges wherever thinkers grapple with the nature of time, memory, and communication. It is not a claim that information actually travels backward through time in the everyday sense. It is a way of wondering whether information behaves differently from the solid world we touch. To approach this gently, imagine a sound echoing across a valley. The echo is not the original voice. It carries no body, no speaker, no intention. and yet it preserves something essential: the pattern of the sound. By the time it reaches your ears, the source may already be gone, but the information remains. Or imagine standing near a lake at night. A single stone breaks the surface, sending ripples outward. Long after the stone has sunk, the ripples continue to move, overlapping, fading, reshaping the surface. If you arrive late, you might still see the motion without ever knowing what caused it. Information in these images is not an object, it is a pattern in motion. Some philosophers and physicists have wondered whether time itself might carry information in similar ways, not as messages sent deliberately from the future, but as correlations that stretch across moments. In this view, events are linked not only by cause and effect, but by shared structure. When one part of the structure changes, other parts may reflect that change indirectly. This is where dreams quietly re-enter the conversation. Dreams are rich in patterns, emotional patterns, narrative patterns, symbolic patterns. They are not precise descriptions of reality, but compressions of meaning. They take vast amounts of experience and reduce them into images that can be felt, even when they cannot be explained. If information exists as pattern rather than substance, then dreams may be especially sensitive to it. Not because they receive messages from the future, but because they are already operating in a language of pattern, not detail. This idea can sound abstract, but its emotional effect is often simple. When a dream later feels aligned with reality, the alignment may not be about prediction. It may be about resonance. Two moments, one dreamed, one lived, share a similar informational shape. They echo each other, even if they are separated in time. From this perspective, the feeling of "I dreamed this before" does not require a timeline being crossed. It requires only that the mind recognizes a familiar pattern when it appears again. This recognition can feel uncanny because we are used to associating information with direct signals, words spoken, images seen, facts learned. Dreams work differently. They do not announce what they carry. They suggest, they imply, they gesture. And because dreams are experienced in a state where ordinary attention is relaxed, they may be more open to subtle patterns that waking consciousness ignores. It is important to emphasize that this remains speculative. There is no established science showing that information travels backward through time in the way science fiction imagines. The idea persists not because it is proven, but because it helps articulate something people feel but struggle to describe. Skepticism here is healthy. Without it, imagination runs too far ahead of understanding. But curiosity is also healthy. Without it, understanding never expands. What keeps this idea alive is not evidence of precognition, but the consistency of the human experience. Across cultures and centuries, people have reported moments when knowledge seemed to arrive without a clear source. Dreams are one of the most common places where this happens. Science explains much of this through memory, emotion, and pattern recognition, and those explanations are powerful. But some people sense that there is still something left over, a residue that does not fully dissolve. This residue may not point to new physics, it may point to new ways of thinking about consciousness. Consciousness does not merely receive information, it organizes it, it prioritizes it, it weaves it into stories that help us navigate the world. Dreams are one of the spaces where this weaving happens most freely. If information is pattern and dreams are pattern makers, then it is not surprising that dreams sometimes feel strangely well-timed, not because they know what will happen, but because they are tuned to the structures that make certain outcomes more likely. This view also protects us from fatalism. It does not suggest that the future is fixed or that dreams dictate what must occur. It suggests only that the mind is sensitive to tendencies, tensions, and trajectories. A sailor does not need to know the exact path of a storm to sense that weather is changing. The signs are enough. Dreams may function in a similar way. They do not reveal the storm, they reveal the pressure in the air. This interpretation invites wonder without demanding belief. It allows us to sit with the mystery without turning it into doctrine. It gives language to an experience without insisting on its explanation. And perhaps that is why ideas like this endure. Not because they answer the question, but because they hold it gently. As this part of our journey draws to a close, the focus begins to soften. We have wandered through laboratories and philosophies, memories and metaphors. We've examined explanations without insisting on conclusions. What remains is not certainty, but a sense of scale. Dreams are small moments, experienced privately, often forgotten by morning, and yet they touch questions as large as time, meaning, and awareness. They remind us that the mind is not a simple instrument, and that understanding often arrives in fragments rather than declarations. In the quiet that follows, it may be enough to acknowledge this. Whatever dreams are doing, they are part of how humans make sense of uncertainty. They do not need to carry bodies through time. They do not need to deliver messages from tomorrow. It may be enough that they carry patterns, soft echoes that sometimes by chance or by structure align with the world we wake into. And when they do, the feeling is not that the future has spoken. It is that the mind has recognized something familiar, drifting gently through the shape of time. When the conversation turns toward dreams that seem to arrive ahead of time, it almost inevitably drifts toward a deeper concern, one that sits quietly beneath curiosity and wonder, waiting to be noticed. If a dream can feel like a glimpse of what is coming, what does that say about choice? The idea can be unsettling. It can feel as though something precious is being questioned, the sense that life is open, that decisions matter, that the future is shaped, at least in part, by what we choose to do next. For many people, this is where fascination gives way to discomfort, but it may help to pause here and soften the question before answering it. Dreams that feel precognitive are rarely clear instructions. They do not arrive with commands or demands. They do not say this will happen and nothing can change it. Instead, they arrive as moods, symbols, impressions. They suggest possibility, not certainty. In this way, they are much closer to weather signs and to written fate. Seeing dark clouds does not mean rain is inevitable. It means conditions are present. Choices still matter. You can seek shelter, change direction, or simply continue walking. The clouds inform awareness, not outcome. Dreams may function in a similar role. They do not remove freedom, they highlight sensitivity. When a dream feels aligned with a later event, it may not be announcing that the event was unavoidable. It may be revealing that the dreamer was already tuned to certain tensions, possibilities, or trajectories in their life. The dream does not dictate the future, it reflects readiness for it. This distinction is important because it shifts the emotional weight of the experience. Instead of asking, was this meant to happen? We can ask, what was I already sensing? Free will, in everyday life, does not require total unpredictability. We make choices within constraints all the time. We choose within circumstances, personalities, histories, and environments we did not fully choose. Yet those choices still feel meaningful. Dreams do not change this structure. They operate within it. Even if time is more complex than we usually imagine, awareness still moves one moment at a time. You still wake up not knowing exactly what the day will bring. You still respond, adjust, and decide. Dreams do not grant certainty. They grant perspective. In fact, uncertainty may be what protects freedom most. If dreams truly delivered precise knowledge of future events, choice would become irrelevant. But they do not. They are ambiguous, symbolic, open to interpretation. This ambiguity preserves agency. It ensures that no dream, however vivid, can override responsibility. This is why many traditions that value dreams also emphasized humility in interpreting them. A dream was not an order, it was a suggestion, a nudge toward awareness, not obedience. From a psychological standpoint, this ambiguity serves an important function. It prevents overconfidence, it discourages rigid thinking. It keeps the dreamer engaged with the present rather than fixated on imagined outcomes. Dreams that feel ahead of time often invite reflection, not action. They encourage a person to slow down, to notice patterns, to care more attentively. They do not tell a person what to do. They invite a person to be present, and presence is where choice lives. It is also worth considering the cost of believing that everything is fixed. Fatalism can be comforting in the short term. It relieves responsibility, but over time it diminishes engagement. It makes effort feel pointless and curiosity feel dangerous. Dreams, as people experience them, rarely push in this direction. Even unsettling dreams tend to sharpen attention rather than dull it. They wake people up emotionally. They make them listen more closely to themselves and their surroundings. This suggests that, whatever their origin, these dreams function in a way that supports agency rather than undermines it. They do not close the future, they complicate it. From this perspective, free will does not require ignorance of possibility. It requires room to respond. Dreams can expand awareness without narrowing choice. They can make us more thoughtful without making us passive. For listeners resting quietly, this can be reassuring. You do not need to solve the mystery of time to live freely. You do not need to decide whether dreams ever glimpse the future. You only need to recognize that awareness itself is not a prison. It is a resource. Dreams, even strange ones, do not bind you. They accompany you. They remind you that the mind is always working, sensing, preparing. They do not tell you where to go. They help you notice where you already are. As this journey nears its end, the questions become softer, less about explanation, more about relationship. How do we live alongside uncertainty without being ruled by it? How do we listen without surrendering responsibility? Dreams offer one answer, not through certainty, but through tone. They speak quietly, they speak indirectly, they leave space for choice, and in that space free will remains intact, not as absolute freedom from influence, but as the ongoing ability to respond with awareness, care, and intention. Perhaps that is what dreams, even the strange ones, ultimately protect. As the night deepens and the mind begins to loosen its grip on effort, it may be helpful to notice how this journey has changed the question it began with. We started by asking whether some dreams arrive ahead of time, whether they offer glimpses of what has not yet happened. Along the way, we explored memory and emotion, history and science, bodies and symbols, time and choice. And now, near the end, the question feels quieter, less urgent, less demanding, more spacious. Perhaps the most honest thing science can say about precognitive feeling dreams is not that they are illusions, nor that they are revelations. It is that they sit at the boundary of what we currently understand, and boundaries are often where curiosity belongs most. Science is not a collection of final answers. It is a living process, shaped by humility as much as by discovery. Each generation pushes its tools a little further, refines its questions, and learns to live with uncertainty a little more gracefully. What feels mysterious today may feel ordinary tomorrow. And what feels obvious today may later seem incomplete. Dreams have always lived in this shifting space. They are deeply personal yet widely shared. Fleeting yet emotionally powerful. Easy to dismiss yet difficult to forget. They arrive without permission, speak in their own language, and leave before explanations catch up. For some people, a dream that feels ahead of time becomes a quiet landmark in memory. Not something to build a belief system around, but something that subtly alters how they listen. To themselves, to others, to the unfolding of events. It reminds them that not everything meaningful arrives through deliberate thought. For others, dreams remain simply dreams. Strange stories the mind tells itself in the dark, and that too is a perfectly reasonable relationship to have with them. What matters is not agreement, but openness. There is value in staying curious without becoming rigid, in allowing questions to remain questions, in recognizing that understanding does not always mean resolution. Sometimes it means learning how to rest alongside what we do not yet know. Dreams invite this kind of rest. They do not ask us to solve time or consciousness before morning. They ask us only to notice, to listen gently, to accept that the mind has its own rhythms, its own ways of preparing us for change, loss, joy, and uncertainty. Whether or not dreams ever brush against the future, they clearly touch something real in us. They reflect how we carry memory forward, how we imagine what might come next, and how we respond emotionally to possibility. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the feeling of having dreamed something before it happened is not a message from tomorrow, but a reminder that the present moment is already layered with anticipation, memory, and meaning. That awareness is not confined to a single point in time, even if our actions are. In this sense, dreams are quiet companions. They walk alongside waking life, sometimes whispering, sometimes remaining silent, always moving just out of reach of full explanation. They do not need to be decoded to be respected. They do not need to be proven to be felt. As you rest now, you may find that your own thoughts drift freely. Images may appear and fade. Memories may blend with imagination. This is not something to control. It is something to allow. If you think back on your own dreams, those you remember clearly, and those that vanished by morning, you may notice that their value was never in accuracy. It was in how they made you feel, how they lingered, how they nudged your attention in subtle ways. Science will continue to study sleep, memory, and consciousness. New tools will be built. New theories will rise and fall. The language we use to describe the mind will evolve, and with it, our understanding of dreams may grow clearer, or more complex, or both. Until then, there is room for wonder. Room to acknowledge that some experiences do not fit neatly into categories. Room to hold mystery without turning it into belief or fear. Room to let questions soften rather than harden. And as this exploration comes to a close, there is no need to take anything with you. No conclusions to remember, no answers to defend. Only the quiet sense that the mind is deeper, more creative, and more subtle than we often give it credit for. If you find yourself drifting towards sleep now, that is perfectly fine. Let the thoughts dissolve. Let the questions fade into the background. They do not need attention anymore, and if you remain awake simply resting with these ideas, that is fine too. Curiosity does not require urgency. Thank you for spending this quiet time here, for allowing your thoughts to wander gently through uncertainty and back again, wherever you're listening from and whatever time it is for you right now. May your night be calm and your dreams, whatever they may be, soft companions rather than puzzles to solve. And when morning comes, the world will still be waiting. Not with answers, perhaps, but with space enough for curiosity, choice, and rest.